idea.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you here. I've been giving this talk, as he said, all over Germany. And I need to say a few caveats at the start. First, nothing I say should be taken as official American policy. And also, unfortunately, I can't move. I usually dance a lot when I lecture, but I'm told that the YouTube audience has a very narrow frame, and they will not see me if I do my normal dancing. So I'll have to use my hands a lot like an Italian. But in any case, anything American policy, it's my own opinion, and it is a tribute to the diversity and free speech of the United States that our government sends academics who both agree and don't agree and have different views about issues than the official American policy. I should thank the consulate and Annika for making it possible for me to be here today. One final caveat, being mostly Germans, I'm sure that your English is very good, but some of you may have learned English wrong from British people, in which case my use of the correct English will sometimes be confusing. If at any point you don't understand any phrase I use or a concept, please raise your hand. You will speak for 4 other Germans who are too shy to admit they don't understand. Also, if I start to speak too quickly, which I sometimes do, because I get excited about American politics, someone wave their hands like a drowning man, and I'll slow down. So we're talking today about assessing the first year of Trump, and it's important to remember there is no standard measure for what a successful presidency looks like. So we're going to look at some of the standard half measures that we might look at in political science, such as laws passed, where he is at the polling, success with his appointments, promises made and kept. We'll consider Trump from the perspective of his supporters, and that's one of the things that I think Germans are most interested in, as to why are his base supporters still so strongly for him, because I don't think Trump as a politician, with his style and his positions, would do particularly well in Germany right now, although we'll see. We'll look at academic analysis, critics. We're going to do some foreign policy, but the focus will be more on domestic affairs. And it's important, again, to remember this is very preliminary. 10 months, 11 months into a presidency, you can't make any sort of final judgment. At this time, Bush II was riding high, incredibly high in the polls. That was after 9/11. But even before 9/11, he'd had some very significant accomplishments on tax policy get through the Congress. And we know where that presidency ended, right, in widely considered to be a failed presidency by the end. And by contrast, Bill Clinton was failing, was struggling badly at this time in his first year in office. And we know where that movie ended. He was quite a successful president. So I'll end by talking about some scenarios where can Trump succeed given this start. So this is the polling data. It's not a pretty picture. There's never been an American president in his first year in office that never once crossed 50%. Trump never did. There's never been an American president in his first year in office that hit 32% approval in the Gallup. Approval is the bottom line there. Disapproval is the upper line. Another significant thing that is different from every modern American president since Roosevelt, there's no honeymoon here. American presidents get a honeymoon, a time when America's still in love with them, a time when partisans on the other side say, okay, we didn't vote for him, but we're going to give him a chance. And so this marriage between Trump and America had no honeymoon. Now, it's arguable that Trump didn't get a honeymoon because he didn't do the things presidents normally do to get a honeymoon. He didn't reach out beyond his base. He didn't say nice things to the other side consistently from the transition to the first 3 months in office. But the honeymoon period is an important rhythm to the American presidency because so much of the most important things that presidents get done happens in that period. It comes from Roosevelt's first 100 days. And these polling numbers, start and finish, are bad news for Trump. These are the number of laws passed. So two ways of measuring it: the number of laws signed and the total number of pages, to try and take some of these laws could be one page, just symbolic. And as you can see here, he's on the lower end in terms of number of laws. The total number of pages, he comes out a little better, but that's a really imperfect measure. What is true and beyond denial is that Trump, unlike almost all presidents in the modern era, has failed to get a single large piece of legislation through Congress. And it's particularly worthy of note given that he had a solid majority in the House and a majority in the Senate behind him upon inauguration. And since 1968, many, many American presidents don't get that, and they still managed to do something. The great example might be Reagan. Reagan, who always had the House of Representatives with a huge Democratic majority, still managed to do a great deal in his first year. Trump has managed to do almost nothing. Now, deregulation did pass early in his presidency. So there were 15 rollbacks of laws that were passed in the last months of Obama, and some of them were quite significant in their specific areas. So while he was unable to repeal Obamacare, and he may not be able to get a tax cut, he did make some changes that are very important on environmental questions and a few others. He also, perhaps his greatest legislative accomplishment, was putting someone on the Supreme Court. Not every president does that, and many presidents have stumbled. And the rollout of that nomination and the shepherding through the Senate was really competently done. And that's one of the reasons many conservatives voted for Trump. They held their noses and said, Supreme Court. And so he kept that campaign promise. He's also done things through executive order. Obama did too, by the way. Obama did something called the Dreamers Act, or DACA, which gave a quasi-legal status to illegal immigrants who arrived in America as children, i.e. the idea is they're blameless, they didn't choose to break the immigration law, and they're here now, they've been raised in American schools, and they are particularly pull at the heartstrings, and so unable to get anything through his Congress, Obama used executive order to give them legal status. Trump has told Congress he will reject that in March if they don't do something by March. So he's done some executive orders on that, on travel, and those have importance. Perhaps his greatest impact is these last 2 points. First, in foreign policy, there's always been more power given to the president than in domestic. So he took us out of the Paris Accord, took us out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and is right now renegotiating NAFTA. As your professor and I were saying, it's hard to get data on where those negotiations are, but it's a very big change to have America questioning NAFTA. And it is not impossible, by the way, that in the next 12 months, one of the three of us, or all of us, could declare the renegotiations a failure and end NAFTA, which would be an American Brexit, except it might even be worse for the American economy than Brexit will work out to be. And then there's the changes in government. He's done a couple things that are altering government from within. Let me give you an example. He's appointing people to positions of power over agencies they fundamentally disagree with. So we have a Secretary of Education who every biography of her points out she doesn't like public education. She's against it at her molecular level, and she's our Secretary of Education. We have a head of the EPA who thinks the last 30 years of Environmental Protection Agency work is mostly wrong, right? And has said scathing things and has sued the EPA multiple times when he was in Oklahoma politics. We have a Secretary of Energy who, God bless him, after his nomination said, well, golly, when I was appointed Secretary of Education, I thought Secretary of Energy, I thought energy would have a lot to do with coal, gas, and oil. Turns out it's mostly nuclear. That's Texas for nuclear. And he didn't understand the agency he was appointed to at the time of his appointment. And the Department of Energy has a huge budget. And what they mostly do is manage America's nuclear weapons program and manage its peaceful nuclear energy program. And they do some other things too, like managing 3 of the biggest scientific laboratories in the world, which is one reason why historically leaders of the Department of Energy have been world-class scientists. Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, is many things, a good politician. He's not a world-class scientist. And to add a sarcastic cream coating to that ironic cake I've just set before you, in 2012, when Rick Perry was running for president, he was in a Republican presidential debate, and he said, if I'm elected president, I'm going to shut down three agencies of the federal government we don't even need. Department of Education, Department of Labor, and then the other Republican candidate starts shouting out, Commerce, which no, he didn't remember the name of the Department of Energy as the thing he wanted to shut down, which is the department he now leads. He thought it was useless and worthy of being shut down 4 years ago. Now he leads it. So that creates a morale issue. And I could go on. These are just the top three. There are other people who have been put in charge of things they don't like. It's like putting a vegetarian in charge of a butcher shop. It might not be the best idea. Or maybe it is. Not only that, but this is 100 days in. There were a lot of empty chairs, a lot of unfilled positions, and this is of the top 1,100 positions. One of the things that's unusual about the American system is the extraordinarily high number of positions a new executive gets to fill. So it's over 3,000. These are just the top 1,000. And as you can see, Trump is well behind the pace of Bush. This chart has gotten worse by now, much, much worse. The original explanation for all the empty chairs, Trump had a truncated transition. He fired his transition chair halfway through the transition, and that's the place where all the jobs candidates come from. He didn't have a very well-run White House in the early days. There was a lot of staff turmoil. But now he's further behind. Those excuses don't hold up. What is going on is Trump has said to reporters, a lot of these jobs don't need to be filled. So imagine for a moment, you work for the federal government of the United States, and you worked for, say, 20 years. And you think the agency and the sub-agency that you've devoted your life to is important. Well, there's a high probability that Trump has either appointed somebody to lead your agency who doesn't agree with the agency, or he said, they're so unimportant, they don't need leadership. And that, I think, is changing our government in ways that aren't measured by legislation. Remember that one of his key advisors, Steve Bannon, said in a speech before, or an interview before the election, my goal is to smash the Democratic Party, then destroy the Republican Party, and dismantle the deconstruct the modern administrative state. I don't think Trump thinks about things in that sort of ideological sense the way Bannon does, but this looks like if I was going to deconstruct the administrative state, I'd be doing things like this. And this is another slide that shows you, again, that he's well behind. These are the top 500 positions, 570 positions, and he's simply falling behind more and more the norm. He only had 50 Senate confirmed, nominated and confirmed by July 21st. And you look at Obama, 4 times that many, Bush, 4 times that many, and so on. Staff turmoil. This is a picture in the first 25 days of White House. Why do I know that? Because this dude, the National Security Advisor, was fired shortly thereafter. The shortest tenure of any National Security Advisor. And he was fired because he didn't fill out, well, the excuse we were given was that he told an untruth about the Russia connections to the Vice President, and the Vice President went on camera and said things that weren't true. It also is the case, we now know, that he failed to disclose numerous contracts with foreign governments, as well as income from Turkey and Russia, and he never registered as a foreign agent, so there's multiple law violations in your nominee. A good vetting process would have maybe discovered that. Next to him, we have Sean Spicer, the press secretary. He's gone, and he wasn't gone in sort of a peaceful, smooth way where he said, I've decided to become an organic farmer. He was bleeding from the first week as press secretary. There were rumors that Trump wanted him out, that he wasn't happy with his strength. He was being portrayed on Saturday Night Live by a woman, and rumor had it Trump hated that. And so he was really not popular within some wings of the White House very early on. So there was this rumors that he would go out soon. Next to him is Steve Bannon. I mentioned him already. He was a top advisor to the president, and he was seen as Trump's brain, I think inaccurately, but he was certainly influential in a lot of the staff meetings, and he's gone. And next to him is the chief of staff, and in a normal White House, most powerful person after the president. Reince Priebus was never that person. And it's really rare or unusual for a president to get rid of his own chief of staff in the first 6 months. But it's unprecedented for all the people in this picture to be gone that fast. And when Priebus and Spicer went, I don't know if this was covered in Germany, but it was with the arrival of a new communications director. By some measures, the fourth communication director this White House has had, Scaramucci. And Scaramucci was named communication director, the person that's supposed to make you look good to the American public, and in one of his first days on the job, he thought it appropriate to call a reporter at his home at night and launch into an obscene attack on Spicer and on Priebus technically being his boss, and he said things that you can't print in a family newspaper about him, and some of them that were quite pornographic and physically impossible unless you're a gymnast. And he lasted 10 days, which has now become a measure of length in office in the Trump administration. They talk about how many mooches have you lasted. If you get 50 days, that's 5 mooches. If you get to 10 mooches, that's a substantial tenure. So we've never seen this level of turmoil. Now, I was on German TV during the election season telling you, in my professional opinion, there's no way Trump can get the nomination. And then I doubled down and said, there's no way he can win. Haha, sorry about that. I did call this. I was lecturing the summer before the election. I said, okay, Hillary's going to be the president, I think. Here's her management style. It was a lecture on White House management. But if Trump wins, we already know how he'll manage. He's managing his campaign the way he managed his business, which is a short attention span, workaholic method. So the way he organizes businesses is not like Exxon or a major Fortune 500 company. Trump organization actually at times was quite large, but the executive layer was quite small, and it didn't have a hierarchy. It was Trump and 12 executives with unclear authority over each other. And decisions were made in a very chaotic, non-process way. Trump often was said to make a decision at the very last minute based on who was the last person he consulted with. And so there were stories of executives camping outside his office on the evening of a big decision, hoping to be that person. There's been a great deal of turmoil in this White House, a lack of efficient decision-making, and an utter failure on messaging. So they're trying to do what every modern White House does, which is set a theme for the day, set a theme for the week, set a theme for the month. And the theme for the week might be jobs. And Trump decides to pick a fight with a celebrity. Or Trump decides to attack North Korea. Or, you know, he's not messaging well, and you can sort of see why he'd have 4 communications people. So here's if we assess his promises. So he promised to take us out of the Paris Accord. He absolutely did. He promised to stop the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He certainly did. Build a wall. He promised, maybe his most high-profile promise. It's unlikely that we'll get a wall from sea to shining sea. And over again in the campaign, he said, a real wall. A wall that will cover the whole border. That's what we need if we are going to be a nation. That will not happen. And you can trust me because I told you he wouldn't get elected. But what will happen, there will be some sort of ribbon cutting, there will be a structure, it will be a partial wall, it will look, at least in that portion of the border, like what he promised. And will Mexico pay for it? No, but we'll take a smidgen of the aid that we give to Mexico, or maybe larger than a smidgen, and we'll redirect it towards the wall, and Trump will say, I made Mexico pay for it. He promised a Muslim ban, he promised extreme vetting. His first 2 travel bans were stopped. We're litigating the 3rd. He's already changed some aspects of our border control, so partial yes. He promised a balanced budget. The fiscal news out of Washington is so bad I cannot tell you. We are heading for massive, massive, massive deficits as far as the eye can see, and that's if we pass the Trump tax cuts. If we don't, we're headed for just one massive, not massive, massive, massive. So America's heading for greater deficit spending due to demographics, but Trump is pouring gasoline on that fire by adding in these tax cuts, mostly at the very wealthy. He's promised to repeal Obamacare on day 1. He said he had a health care plan. Actually, during the campaign, a few times he promised to reveal it. He never did. He didn't have a plan. And what he did is he just let the Republicans in Congress come up with their plan. Now, Obama did that too. He promised he'd have a health care plan and then let Congress take the lead. But he was involved in the process at every step, saying, this, not this, this, not this. Trump got a plan from Congress at the House and then undercut it by saying it was too mean, and then the Senate voted against their plan, and so there's no plan for repealing Obamacare. So I would say that's not been done. He may cut taxes, but he promised to do it in a way that would not hurt the middle class. That's not the plan we see today. One of the big disappointments, speaking personally, is I really believed in November after the election that there was a positive hope that Trump the builder who doesn't have a strong partisan background as a Republican, would be able to reach out to the Democrats and get real progress, because America has significant infrastructure needs, and Republicans are usually against spending on those needs. And I thought this will be a bipartisan or nonpartisan moment, and his plan from the get-go has gone nowhere. It turned into a public-private partnership plan where the public puts up almost no money, and corporations were expected to pick up the rest, and it's gone nowhere. Another thing that has characterized the first 10 months of this White House is unprecedented ethical dilemmas and questions. The emoluments clause, if you think, oh, I'm not good at English, I don't know what that means. None of my students did either before this presidency. It's an obscure clause in the Constitution that was actually designed because we didn't want, as a young, small government, to have our leaders taken over by gifts from foreign powers. It's kind of what Prussia and Austria and Russia did to Poland's diet of nobles, that they would just buy off a couple and buy a couple votes, and then Poland quickly disappeared for a couple years. So we haven't cared about this part of the Constitution. It's supposed to prevent the president from accepting foreign gifts. But now we have a president who refused to divest himself of his businesses. He doesn't have a blind trust. He has Eric and Junior running the company. And what that means is, if you want to curry favor with Trump, it wouldn't be a bad idea to rent 40 rooms at the Trump International Hotel in D.C., as governments from the Middle East and other places have done. And that directly puts money in the pocket of the president. There are lawsuits right now about the legality of that. I was told I had to include some law in my talk. Well, that's the law bit. And conflicts of interest are rife in this administration, not just about that hotel and not just from foreign governments, but also lobbyists, also people who are domestic, trying to buy rooms at that hotel, holding events at that hotel, and at other Trump properties all over the country, and indeed the world foreign governments. Trump International is present in a lot of countries. Is it possible that they're cutting deals with that company in order to curry favor with Trump? I think it's possible. After he went to China just recently, China suddenly gave Trump Organization a huge number of trademarks that are very valuable. Nepotism in the White House. Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, his portfolio has recently been trimmed, but initially, in the first month of this White House, he was given a little job of fixing the Middle East, bringing peace between Israel and Palestine. I mean, that can take 3 weeks of solid effort. And he was also our point person on China. He'd had strong outreach during the transition from China. He was given a huge portfolio involving Mexico. And he also was supposed to he was leading a committee, and still is leading a committee, designed to bring innovation from the private sector into the entire federal government. I'm sure Jared Kushner is an incredibly talented guy, but he's a 36-year-old who has never worked a day in government in his life and has no background or training that would lead you to think that he's a diplomat. But seriously, this is a job that the bastard child of Metternich and Kissinger couldn't get accomplished. I mean, it is extraordinary. And it raises questions about family influence in the White House that we haven't seen since ever, or maybe Bobby Kennedy being Attorney General. The president faces one lawsuit, at least, arising out of the 17 women who say he sexually assaulted them. And it's a defamation lawsuit, and it's going to, if his lawyers can't kill it, it's going to lead to these women testifying. And if you know anything about American politics, in the last month and a half, we are at an extraordinary moment where women are coming out and demanding justice for wrongs done 40, 30, 25 years ago. I think that's going to be bad news for the White House. But all of this is nothing compared to the Russia problem. On the day he was inaugurated, he was under an ethical cloud involving Russian influence on our election. That cloud has gotten a lot bigger and a lot darker. No president has ever gotten into this much ethical problem this early in a presidency. You could include the modern era. You could go back to President Grant. You could go back to Teapot Dome. You could, under President Harding. I mean, there's never been anything this serious, this bad, this early, and it's just getting worse. Trump's own actions are making it worse. Just to give you one example, when he fired the FBI director, which is an extraordinary thing for a president to do. It's so incredibly rare. FBI directors have 10-year terms on purpose so that they're not affected by politics, like other offices which change with every new president. But when he did it, his whole White House communications team and the Justice Department communications team said, we did it because of the way he mishandled the investigation of Hillary's emails and server. And everybody stayed on message. And everyone was wondering, does it have something to do with Russia? No, it's just the email. And then the president, 3 days into this message, says, it was the Russia thing. And you're saying, well, somebody's not telling the truth. I don't know. And so that firing him made it worse because we wouldn't have a special prosecutor if he hadn't fired. We might have him by now, but we wouldn't have gotten him as soon. And Mueller is a nightmare for any White House. I would much rather be a president investigated by Ken Starr, the guy who investigated. We had a little problem in 1998. We didn't tell the world about it because it was so embarrassing, but it involved a woman named Lewinsky. And you didn't hear about it. I don't want to go into details. But that led to the appointment, or no, actually that scandal was brought out because Clinton was being investigated by a special prosecutor. But Ken Starr was nothing like Mueller. Mueller does not want to be on TV. He's not on a vendetta against Trump in the way that Starr was to try and punish Clinton. He's not leaking. And it's very serious. The overall Russia investigation raises questions about the integrity of American institutions, particularly our elections. I have a whole nother talk about social media, and there's a section on Russia. I don't have time for that. But it is inarguable, I think, that this is one of, if not the most successful intel programs of the last 50 years by any country. I don't blame Russia for doing it. It was genius. But we will see where it goes. I have to make at least one mention of Trump and race. This is a very unusual president when it comes to the question of race. My first book is about racial politics in America. It's something I care deeply about. This is a picture from Charlottesville, a demonstration where the night before about 200 neo-Nazis marched with torches and they shouted slogans which should resonate in this country. Blood and soil. Jews will not replace us. These were incredible expressions of racism in public in America. And the next day, counter-demonstrators came out in numbers, and they had another march, and then a woman died, killed by a neo-Nazi with a car. Trump's comment on that was that there were good people on both sides. And you could have anticipated that he would have that unbelievable statement if you listened to him during the campaign. During the campaign, he was extravagantly endorsed by the alt-right, by our new neo-Nazis, and by even more racist figures like David Duke, a former leader of the American Nazi Party, a former leader of the Ku Klux Klan, who's been run out of Republican politics because he's way too racist, too openly racist. And when he endorsed Trump, Trump was on TV asking about the endorsement, which had already happened days before, and Trump said, I don't know who David Duke is. I don't know anything about white supremacists. In 1980, when the Klan endorsed Reagan, Reagan didn't say, which Klan leader endorsed me? What's his name? When the Klan endorses you, you do what Reagan did. You say, the Klan are evil. I disavow everything they stand for. I reject their endorsement. They have nothing to do with me. Trump took a day to get to that. Why? For the same reason that on the day when all America was like Nazis, we got Nazis, he said there were good people on both sides, right? Which not a single other political figure said something like that, only the president, which leads me to conclude he's white America's president. If only white Americans were in those polls, Trump would be doing pretty good. He'd be right in the mid-range of presidents. It is the absolute rejection of Trumpism by minorities, blacks, Hispanics, and to a lesser extent Asians, that leads him to be low in the polls. Not that all white people are happy with him, but it's about 50-50, at least until recently. Now whites dropped a little bit in the last 2 weeks. He's continued to offend minorities as he did on the campaign trail, and he's continued to be strange on race, and the academic studies in political science are showing that one of the best predictors of voting for Trump is if you're a white person who's filled with racial resentment. If you agree with this statement, today in America, blacks have it better than whites. Now, why would Trump particularly appeal to people who believe that? Because long before he ran for president, he was fond of saying, you know, if I started out today, I'd rather be black, because blacks get so many advantages. And I'm sure, being who you are, many of you have traveled in the United States. If you do any reading or traveling in the U.S., you know that that's fundamentally not true, right? I mean, it's a misrepresentation, but Trump appeals to that resentment. Am I doing okay on time?
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, you don't know how many more slides there are, so it's a silly question. Could be 20. No, it's on, we're rounding the corner on the end here, so have faith. So one of the key questions is, why is he running his presidency as a base presidency? This is why he didn't get a honeymoon, by the way. But normal American presidents, once the election happens, you immediately try and put the pain of the election behind you. You reach out to the people that didn't vote for you, the people who didn't vote at all, and you say, let's bring us all together. And you never, or almost never, bring up how you smashed the other person in the campaign. Now, his election victory speech had some of that elements. And I remember watching it at 4 a.m., and I was sober, thinking, okay, well, that's good. He's showing some normal American reach out to the losing side. Ever since then, with almost no exception, he can't stop talking about the election, right? I mean, if you ran into him on the street, which you never would, but the first thing he might say by law of probability would be something about, did you hear about my extraordinary historical election victory over crooked Hillary? And now, I get it. It was an amazing, no one predicted it, right? It was an amazing come-from-behind victory that rubbed it in the face of all the arrogant academics who predicted otherwise. Get over it if you want to have a successful presidency, but he hasn't. Also, he said in the campaign, I'm a deal maker. I can reach out to the Democrats, to the moderates. I can do things other leaders can't. I can solve the Washington problems. Only I can solve the Washington problem. But he hasn't done it. The great deal maker has had one Chinese food dinner with the Democratic leadership of Congress and very little to show for it. So it hasn't been that. And he hasn't even done the homework of a normal president, as he didn't do the homework of a normal candidate. I think we as a nation owe an apology to Sarah Palin, who was the vice presidential nominee in 2008, because we attacked her for not knowing a lot about politics, but she knew more than Trump by a large amount. She'd been in politics, and I've talked to people who briefed her before her vice presidential debate. She studied the hell out of foreign policy, and she regurgitated facts under the hot glow of TV lights in front of the entire world. Trump didn't study. He's not learning. He doesn't have policy priorities that would allow him to extend beyond his base, that would get him some legislative accomplishments. And he's not showing compromise with anyone on most issues. If he wanted to get more things done, he'd have to compromise, but he's not. And I'm not sure what motivates this, but he seems content at some level to be a 35% president, a 30% president. Why is his base still with him? Well, they note, if you were to talk to a Trump supporter, I've had some in my classes, and one of my students just says, he's doing so badly because the press is so unfair to him. There's a degree of truth to that. When political scientists assess the level of criticism in stories about Trump compared to other presidents, some studies have it 94% of the stories are more negative than positive. But what should the media do if the president, unlike all past presidents, is repetitively saying things that aren't true? Like, it's a real challenge, because it is negative to say the president again asserted that America has the highest taxes in the world. We don't have the highest taxes. We don't even have the highest business taxes, right? But that's what he keeps saying over and over again. His base likes that the media hates him. They don't trust the media when they tell him he's lying. They see him in a war with the elites, and they're behind him 100% in that war. They agree that the establishment might win on one or two issues, but they still support him because he's the only one who's spoken to their heart, to their concerns. And there is a degree in which it's the language he uses. We've never seen a president talk in the vernacular the way Trump does over and over again. And if you have a PhD, you are more likely to like the speeches of Hillary Clinton because she uses, complex nouns and words with Greek roots and grammar above the 5th grade level. But if you're not a PhD, certain members of the American public love this about Trump. And the things that he's done, some of those accomplishments that might strike a European audience at a university as bad, his base loves. And they love his norm violations. They like, many of them, the way he uses Twitter, that he's attacking the NFL. Normal presidents try not to attack sports heroes, try not to attack sports. But his use of the fact that some athletes, particularly African Americans, have been kneeling before games when the national anthem is played, that is, his base loves that. So his base is still with him. He said during the campaign that he could shoot a guy in the middle of Fifth Avenue and his base would still support him. I'm not sure I'd go that far, but he'd have to do a lot to lose his committed base. So at the end, first year, if we were to interview Trump, he'd say he's already been one of the greatest presidents in history. His base somewhat would agree. His opposition is growing in strength. The Democrats are finding victories finally. The election 3 weeks ago in Virginia, New Jersey, and some other smaller elections was a huge good day for the Democrats. By all the traditional measures, this is a presidency in trouble. If you were chief of staff to any other president, you'd be ringing the alarm bells. But think, everything that I say about his presidency has a parallel in his campaign. His campaign did 50 things that a normal presidential candidate would have been killed by. And one of the reasons that I was so sure he couldn't win is that he'd done all these things. So he had 3 campaign managers on his road to the White House. That's really rare. Some successful presidents have had 2. Most have just the 1 because you want a stable campaign. So the turmoil in the White House, turmoil in the campaign. He was an outsider with no elected experience. He's still that guy. His campaign had no serious policy proposals. You would go to the website and you'd say, okay, where's the policy proposals? Where's the things you're going to do? And it was videos of Trump saying platitudes, or worse. Ethical questions were all over his campaign. He was insensitive on race, scandals, The women assault questions came up during the campaign. There was a tape where Trump admitted to groping women. He was breaking with 50 years of policy expectations, saying things about NATO that no president since Truman and no candidate for a major party since Truman would say, and he still won. So should we be so certain that this presidency is failing? Is it possible that he could leave us all with the same sense that we had in the academy? He's going to lose. He won? Well, first of all, presidential success is measured by two things: peace and prosperity. Well, right now, America is, I know we're drone striking the hell out of a lot of countries, and we still have soldiers on the ground in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan and apparently Africa that we know of. But we're at peace in the eyes of most Americans, right? Americans are not dying, casualty rates not very high, and we're as prosperous or more prosperous as we were under Obama. If we're still that way in 2019, 2020, if that's still true and hasn't been interrupted by a major recession or an ugly war in North Korea, Trump will go up in the polls. Presidents get credit for that, and you'd be hard to deny him credit for that. Not every president leads 4 years of economic growth. But could he do more? Could he reshape politics in kind of a Bannon way? It would take shattering the Republican Party and taking away part of the Democratic base. There'd need to be a civil war in the Republican Party. That may happen. There's some things going on right now that could happen. It would also need the Democratic Party to splinter or have some serious problems. I don't think that is as likely, and Trump can't control that. I think it's more likely the Democrats pick up one of the houses in Congress in 2018 and the presidency in 2020 if Trump's the nominee, but it's not impossible. Trump is a norm violator more than he is any kind of Republican. He has no loyalties, no respect for tradition, no ideology. He's running his presidency from his gut. And he is using new media in a disruptive way that allowed him to do things in the campaign, and maybe he can Twitter his way to a successful presidency in a way that nobody expects because nobody's done it before. Something I also think about, maybe he's the John the Baptist of Twitter. He's the voice crying in the wilderness, showing the way for the Savior, and there's another figure coming in American politics who will have many of Trump's strengths in social media, many of his charisma and his norm violations, but not some of his weaknesses like narcissism and the attention span of a flea and things like that. More likely, though, I think there's a non-trivial possibility he'll resign in frustration. Now, Trump won't tell you that he's resigning in frustration. What he'll do is he'll cut that ribbon on the border and say, no president could get as much done in a year and a half as I have. I turn it over to you to Mike. And it could be also a deal to stop the prosecution of his children. Two of his sons face some serious legal questions arising out of Mueller. Not yet Ivanka, so the one he cares about most, not covered. I don't think impeachment is on the table unless the Democrats take both houses in 2018, and that is still, even if they did that, it would take probably around 15 or 16 Republican senators to vote for impeachment. We're a long way from impeachment, so don't listen to crazy people on MSNBC who think impeachment is next week. It's a long way away. Health issues. We have a man who's 71 years old, who's overweight, who doesn't ever exercise. Golfing is not exercise if a cart is present. And even when you don't use the cart, as Mark Twain said, it's a good walk spoiled. He has a bad diet. He aggressively eats like an unrestrained teenager, and it was part of his appeal to his base that he ate KFC on Air Force One and on his campaign plane. And he gets 3 to 4 hours of sleep a night and is in a high stress and prone to high anger. That's not a profile you want to take to your cardiologist. I'm not wishing bad news on him. It's just that actuarial tables being what they are, I don't think it's impossible that he could resign because of a health issue. Also, presidents who get defeated for re-election are rare. The vast majority of American presidents who enter their name to run for re-election win. In the modern era, the two big losers are Jimmy Carter and George Herbert Walker Bush, the elder Bush, also known as Smart Bush. Carter was challenged in the primaries by Teddy Kennedy. And Teddy Kennedy made him bleed, and then Reagan killed him. 1992, Elder Bush was attacked in the primaries by Pat Buchanan, who was a very Trumpy figure. He was Trump before Trump was cool. And while he didn't win, he hurt Bush so much that it left him open to the Clinton challenge in 92. So I guarantee you, and I'm never wrong, that Trump will face a primary challenge. It may not be an incredibly successful one, but there will be somebody as an avatar of traditional Republican foreign policy, of free trade, of non-racism. There will be someone to voice that wing. There are many millions of Republicans who don't like Trump, that they have tolerated him as a deal with the devil. They'll want their voice as the primaries heat up. And that's bad news for his re-election, if the normal rules apply. And I don't think it's impossible he'll get defeated in the general election. Because Trump is this unpopular, 32% with peace and prosperity. There's no guarantee that the business cycle won't deliver 7, 8, 9% unemployment, right? And where could Trump be that way? Where could Trump be if we do get into an ugly war with hundreds of thousands or millions of casualties on the North Korean peninsula? How low could he go? I want to stop here and give you a couple more scenarios. Just very quickly, some of the things Trump is doing in foreign policy may also defy the experts. No normal president would ever poke personal insults at the leader of North Korea, particularly now that they have nukes and missiles. Trump did that. We all know it won't work. We think it's dangerous playing with a dictator. His speech to the South Korean parliament was extraordinary. His personal attack on the Kim family, which is the heart and soul of that regime. What if it works? Doing something that all the foreign policy intellectuals say don't do. What if they're all wrong and it's a paper tiger? What if the regime is, because there is some evidence from defectors that the regime is losing all of its belief support, that the impact of new media is getting to North Korea. If we are sitting here a year from now and Trump policies are widely accepted to have brought an end to the worst dictatorship on earth with a trivial number of casualties, 1,000, 2,000, after we were told Seoul will burn if we bother the North Koreans, it'd be hard not to give him credit. Or take Israel. He's more pro-Israel than any president in American history, and that's hard to do, right? Because we always say we're the broker, we're trying to be fair to both sides, and everyone knows we're not. Right? By the way, I don't speak for the State Department, so just so you know, that's not what they say. But Trump has put all his chips with the right wing of Israel, with the Likud and the people further to the right. We all know that's not going to work because the Palestinians will never negotiate after they've been insulted and denigrated by this move. What if we're wrong? What if that produces more peace between Israel and Palestine than any president since Jimmy Carter? Hard not to give Trump credit. Final scenario, Ukraine. What if this approach to Russia, suppose he escapes the Russia investigation and there is no smoking gun that leads to impeachment, and he sits down with Russia a year from now, year and a half from now, with Europe at the table, with Ukraine at the table, and they make a deal. The great deal maker resurfaces. And the deal would be something like, Ukraine accepts that Crimea is never coming back. It never is, right? And in return, Russia stops a guerrilla war in the Donbass. And we get peace between Europe, America, and Russia. Hard not to give him credit for that. Right? So there are strange things that could happen, just as they did in the campaign, that could make this a more successful presidency than many people expect. Best things he's done so far, the appointment of Mattis at defense. Mattis is doing a great job at defense. He's stable, and he's found a way to defy Trump without doing it in the newspapers. So Trump says, I want to do this on transgender, no more transgender troops. And Mattis says, okay, we'll study that. And then he puts it into the bureaucracy. And we'll see what comes out. And it's not the only time that's happened. Deregulation, he's done that. If you're a pro-business Republican, you like that aspect. The Supreme Court nominee makes a lot of conservatives happy, makes many others not happy. Nikki Haley at the UN has done an extraordinarily good job of being more traditional Republican, but also keeping Trump happy. She has the look of a future American president. So watch that name. She could well run. And there have been a few occasional flashes of the deal maker that remind that that's possible. Worst things, Puerto Rico. His handling of that disaster has been bad optically and probably bad procedurally and logistically, and it's really bad for the Republicans because Puerto Ricans, the moment they come to the mainland, can vote in elections. They're American citizens, and several 100,000 of them have moved to Florida, and they ain't voting Republican. That's big, but it's not just the political ramifications, the personal suffering, the human suffering in Puerto Rico is epic. And Trump didn't start the hurricane, but his response to it has been terrible. The Charlottesville response, if North Korea does go up into a conflagration that kills 1 million people, it'll be hard not to blame Trump, fairly or not. The appointees that don't understand the agencies, the divisiveness, and the foreign policy that fails to support traditional American values, these are all terrible failings, I think, in a president. I could be wrong. And now I welcome your questions.